My name is Cora Hayes. For as long as I can remember, my life has been intrinsically tied to the moods of Mist Harbor, the small coastal town where I was born and have always lived. Our town is famous for its mists, which roll in from the sea without warning, blanketing the cobblestone streets and blurring the sharp edges of the world into a watercolor of soft grays and blues. For years, I believed that same fog had settled permanently inside my own mind. I wasn't always this way. I have a faded report card from the second grade, tucked away in a cedar box with a handful of other childhood relics. My teacher, Mrs. Davies, had written in her looping cursive, "Cora is a delight. Her curiosity is a lantern, and she possesses a rare emotional depth for a child of 7. I was the girl who organized elaborate funerals for fallen autumn leaves, who wrote poems about the secret lives of seagulls, who believed I could understand the quiet language of the tides. But by the time I was 14, that bright, clear-eyed girl had become a stranger to me. A persistent haze clouded my thoughts. I would cry for reasons I couldn't name, a deep, hollow sadness that felt as vast and anchorless as the ocean on an overcast day. I second-guessed every word that left my mouth. Conversations would dissolve mid-sentence as I lost my train of thought, leaving me stammering and flushed with shame. My memory, once a treasured archive of feelings and facts, became a sieve. My parents, Marcus and Helen Hayes, treated my condition with a kind of gentle, sorrowful gravity that was, in its own way, terrifying. They were pillars of the Mist Harbor community, my father a respected financial advisor, my mother a perennial volunteer on every town committee. They cultivated an image of serene stability. "You've always been so sensitive, darling," my mother would murmur, stroking my hair as I sat numbly on the edge of my bed. Her touch was light, but it felt like a weight. A delicate constitution. "We knew this might happen. It's a chemical imbalance, Cora," my father would explain in his calm, rational tone, as if discussing a dip in the stock market. "It's not your fault, but it is your reality. We have to manage it." And so, my life became a series of managed appointments and prescribed solutions. Therapists they chose, clinics they approved of, medications that smoothed my sharp edges but deepened the fog. I was grateful, in a dull, muted way. They were my caretakers, my protectors against the failings of my own mind. I believed them. I believed them with the exhausted devotion of someone who has forgotten how to believe in herself. That belief held firm until a crisp Tuesday morning in my 20th year. The fog outside had finally lifted, leaving behind a world so bright and sharp it almost hurt to look at. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, and the sea glittered with a million tiny suns. It was on this day of startling clarity that the letter arrived. It came not in a standard business envelope, but in a thick, cream-colored one, bearing the embossed letterhead of a law firm from the city, Dalton and Thorne Solicitors. I opened it with mild curiosity, assuming it was a misdirected piece of mail. The words inside, however, seemed to rearrange the very foundations of my world. "Dear Miss Hayes," it began. "This letter serves as a formal notification regarding the trust established by your late maternal grandfather, Mr. Thomas Davies. As per the stipulations of his last will and testament, the principle of this trust was to remain inaccessible to you until your 20th birthday. That date having now passed, you're entitled to assume full and sole control of the account. We request that you contact our offices at your earliest convenience to confirm your personal details and designate a financial institution for the transfer of assets." A trust fund? My grandfather Thomas, my mother's father, had passed away when I was 13. I remembered him as a quiet man with soil under his fingernails and the scent of lavender and damp earth clinging to his clothes. He had a small nursery on the edge of town, a place of vibrant life and gentle order. He'd never seemed like a man of means. He'd seemed like a man of the earth. That evening, I found my parents in the sunroom, a space they designed to be a bastion of tranquility, filled with orchids and wicker furniture. The setting sun cast long, golden rays across the polished floorboards. My mother was arranging flowers in a vase. My father was reading the paper. The scene was a portrait of domestic peace. My hand trembled as I held out the letter. I got this today, I said, my voice thin. It says Grandpa Thomas left me a trust fund. It says I have full access now. My father lowered his paper, his expression unreadable. My mother paused, a white rose held delicately between her fingers. She smiled, a soft, patient expression I knew all too well. It was the smile she used when I was being difficult. Oh, that, she said, her tone light and dismissive. We didn't want to burden you with it, darling. Financial matters can be so stressful. Burden me? I repeated, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. It's my money. Why wouldn't you tell me? My father folded his newspaper with deliberate precision and placed it on the table beside him. Cora, let's be realistic. You haven't been in a position to manage a significant sum of money. Your focus has rightly been on your health, on achieving stability. The therapist you've been seeing, Dr. Reyes? Even she agrees that you're still in a very fragile state, my mother added, her voice dripping with counterfeit compassion. We've been handling the expenses for your care from that fund. It's what your grandfather would have wanted. For you to be looked after. A cold, sharp thought, as clear and piercing as a shard of ice, cut through the fog in my head. Dr. Reyes. For 5 years, I had sat in her tastefully decorated office, talking in circles about my anxieties and my mental haze. She had always been kind, professional, but distant. The next morning, I canceled my scheduled appointment and called her office directly. When she answered, I didn't waste time with pleasantries. Dr. Reyes, I said, my voice steadier than it had been in years. I have a direct question for you. In the 5 years you've been seeing me, have you ever given me a formal clinical diagnosis for anything more than mild anxiety? There was a pause on the other end of the line. It stretched for an eternity, filled with the static of unspoken words. When she finally spoke, her voice was low and careful. Cora, my professional relationship was initially established with your parents. They were the ones who contracted my services. She took a breath. To answer your question directly, no. I have never formally diagnosed you with a clinical disorder. My notes, which I have submitted regularly, have consistently indicated that your symptoms, anxiety, depressive moods, appeared to be largely situational, not pathological. The room around me seemed to fade. Situational? Then why did you let them and me believe I was so unwell? Why the medication referrals? Why continue the sessions for 5 years? Her sigh was heavy with a decade of unspoken truths. They were insistent. They said if I suggested anything else, if I questioned their assessment of your needs, they would find a doctor who was more cooperative. I told myself I could do more good by staying in your life than by being dismissed. I am deeply sorry, Cora. I was wrong. I hung up the phone, my body numb. The fog in my mind wasn't lifting. It was being burned away by a firestorm of incandescent rage. It wasn't a chemical imbalance. It wasn't a delicate constitution. It was a cage. They hadn't built it with bars and locks, but with whispers, with doubt, with a narrative of my own brokenness so pervasive I had helped them construct my own prison. They had gaslit me into insanity to control a legacy I never knew I had. That night, driven by a new, cold purpose, I pulled the cedar box from the back of my closet. I bypassed the report card and the pressed flowers and went straight for the journals. I opened one from the year I turned 14, the year the fog began to roll in. My own childish handwriting stared back at me, a voice from a past I had been taught to distrust. October 12th, Mom said I imagined the argument she had with Dad last night. She said I get confused when I'm tired. But I heard them. He was yelling about money. She cried and said, "It's the only way." November 3rd, I told Dad I didn't want to take the new pills because they make me feel like I'm underwater. He got very quiet and said if I don't cooperate, I could end up like Aunt Clara, in that white building she never leaves. I don't want to go there. So I took them. December 1st, I tried to tell Dr. Coleman, the first therapist, that I feel better when I work in Grandpa Thomas's old greenhouse. He told me that was avoidant behavior. Mom and Dad sold the greenhouse last week. They said it was too much for me to see it and be sad. I closed the journal, a chill seeping into my bones that had nothing to do with the night air. They hadn't just lied to me. They had actively, methodically dismantled my reality, piece by piece, memory by memory. They had curated my world to keep me small, silent, and sick. But they had made a fatal error. They had underestimated the girl who wrote poems about seagulls. They had forgotten about the woman she was meant to become. And now, that woman was finally awake. I was no longer just their daughter. I was a beneficiary, a witness, and I had a story to tell. My story. The old Cora, the one they had so carefully cultivated, would have confronted them in a storm of tears and accusations. She would have demanded answers and been met with the same placid, patronizing smiles. The new Cora, the one forged in the cold fire of revelation, knew that was a fool's errand. Silence was my shield now and observation my sword. My first move was to contact Dalton and Thorne again. I spoke to a senior partner, a Mr. Alastair Thorne, whose voice sounded like old leather and whiskey. He confirmed the existence of the trust, established by my grandfather with an initial principal of nearly $1 million. It was intended to fund my education and give me a secure start in life. The account is still active, Ms. Hayes, he explained, though the balance is considerably diminished. Diminished? How? I asked, keeping my voice even. There was a rustle of papers. There is a clause in the trust, an emergency provision. It allows the legal guardians to access funds prior to the age of majority in the event of severe medical hardship or psychological incapacitation. Your parents invoked that clause shortly after your 14th birthday. The words hung in the air. Psychological incapacitation. They had legally declared me incompetent. They submitted extensive documentation, Mr. Thorne continued, his tone sympathetic. Medical reports, therapeutic assessments. The withdrawals over the past 11 years have been substantial, all categorized under medical oversight and specialized care. The total comes to just over $450,000. $450,000. The number was staggering. It had paid for the therapists who diagnosed the situation instead of the patient, the medications that kept me sedated, the wellness retreats that were little more than luxurious isolation wards. It had paid for the very construction of my cage. My next step was to visit Dr. Reyes in person. I didn't go to her office. I asked to meet her at a small, neutral coffee shop by the harbor. She looked older than I remembered, her face etched with a weariness that went beyond professional fatigue. I slid a cashier's check for $5,000 across the table. It was nearly all the money I had to my name from my part-time job at the local library. I want to hire you, I said, my voice low and clear. Not as my therapist. As a consultant. I need you to help me understand everything they did. Ethically. Legally. I want you to walk me through every report, every assessment you were pressured to sign. She stared at the check, then at me. Her eyes filled with a complex mixture of shame and something that looked like relief. She pushed the check back towards me. I will do it for free, Cora. It's the least I can do. I pushed it back. No. This is a professional engagement. Our old relationship is over. This is the beginning of a new one. I am your client, and I am in charge. For the first time, a glimmer of respect, of awe, entered her eyes. She nodded slowly. All right, Cora. Where do we begin? The next 2 months were a quiet, methodical excavation of my own life. With Dr. Reyes's guidance, I requested every medical and financial document filed in my name since I was 13. The paperwork arrived in thick manila envelopes, a paper trail of my own supposed decline. But the paper trail led somewhere else. At Dr. Reyes's suggestion, I used a portion of my grandfather's remaining funds, which I now had access to discreetly hire a forensic accountant from the city. I communicated with him only through encrypted email, a ghost in my own investigation. His findings were more damning than I could have imagined. Yes, a significant portion of the money had been funneled to doctors and pharmacies. But there was more. My parents had taken out a series of business loans, leveraging the trust as collateral. They had listed me, their psychologically incapacitated daughter, as a silent partner on the loan agreements. And then there was the company itself. An LLC registered under the name Coastal Calm Dynamics. It billed the trust for exorbitant amounts for services like aura cleansing, somatic recalibration, and environmental detoxification. It was a shell company, a phantom enterprise designed to launder my inheritance into their pockets. The registered CEO, the name on the official state filings? Cora Hayes. I stared at the document, at my own name, and felt a dizzying wave of vertigo. I had been a patient, a diagnosis, a liability. But I was also, unknowingly, a CEO. I was funding the very lifestyle they claimed was burdened by my illness. The final piece of the puzzle came from Dr. Reyes. A week after our investigation began, she called me, her voice tight with purpose. Cora, I have something else. Something I've kept for years. I started having ethical concerns about 3 years ago. I began documenting my conversations with your parents. I have audio recordings. My heart hammered against my ribs. Recordings. I made them for my own protection, in case I was ever called before a review board. I can let you hear them. But Cora, once you do, and once you decide to act, there is no turning back. The family you thought you had will be gone forever. I met her at her now-vacated office that evening. She played the files from a small, password-protected digital recorder. The first was my mother's voice, smooth as silk, threaded with steel. Just write the notes as we discussed, Dr. Reyes. If Cora starts thinking she's fine, she'll stop taking her medication. You have no idea how unmanageable she becomes. It's for her own good. The second was my father's, clipped and pragmatic. Look, it's our money, fundamentally. My father-in-law was a sentimental old fool leaving that kind of sum to a teenage girl. We are her parents. We are simply ensuring the funds are allocated responsibly. It's what's fair. The words echoed in the empty room, stripping away the last vestiges of my childhood illusions. This wasn't a misguided attempt to care for me. This was greed, pure and simple, dressed up in the language of concern. This was the theft of my life, my mind, and my future. I looked at Dr. Reyes, whose face was pale in the dim light. There was no going back the moment they decided I was broken, I said, my voice devoid of any tremor. Thank you, Lena. Using her first name felt like crossing a final, definitive bridge. I know what I have to do now. My plan wasn't for a dramatic courtroom battle. I had no interest in years of legal wrangling, of having my life and sanity dissected in public. I wanted something cleaner, quieter, and far more absolute. I wanted them to dismantle the cage themselves. A week later, I invited them for dinner at my small apartment. Just us, I'd said on the phone. I want to talk. They arrived bearing a bottle of expensive wine and a pot of my mother's famous chowder, their faces arranged in masks of warm, parental concern. Oh, darling, you look so much better, my mother cooed, brushing a stray strand of hair from my forehead. Clear-eyed. The new regimen must be working wonders. I smiled and took the chowder. I served the wine. We talked about the weather, about the upcoming Mist Harbor Founders Day parade, about all the meaningless, surface-level things that had constituted our relationship for years. I played the part of the dutiful, fragile daughter one last time. Then, as they were finishing their dessert, a lemon tart I'd baked myself, I slid a single, plain white envelope across the table. "What's this, sweetheart?" my father asked, picking it up. Inside was not a lawyer's letter. It was a single sheet of paper with transcripts of their 2 conversations with Dr. Reyes, printed in neat, black type. I watched as the blood drained from their faces. The color receded from my mother's cheeks, leaving her skin looking like parchment. My father's hand, holding the paper, began to tremble. What is this?" he stammered, his voice a dry rasp. "It's a fabrication," my mother snapped, her composure cracking for the first time I could ever recall. "You're unwell, Cora. You're having delusions. This is a bluff." I met her gaze, my own calm and steady. "Am I?" I tilted my head. "That transcript is attached to a scheduled email, along with the full audio files, the forensic accounting report on coastal calm dynamics, and the fraudulent loan agreements. It's set to be delivered to Mr. Thorne at the law firm, the State Banking Commission, and the IRS in precisely 48 hours. Silence. The only sound was the distant moan of a foghorn out in the harbor. They were frozen, their masks of serene control shattered. "I don't want a lawsuit," I said softly, but my voice carried the weight of iron. "I don't want your money back. I want my name. I want it scrubbed from the loans, from the shell company, from every fabricated medical report. I want my legal standing as a competent adult affirmed and all guardianship controls dissolved. I want you to undo every knot you've tied for the last 11 years. My father reached for his wine glass, his hand shaking so badly it rattled against the table. You have 48 hours to fix it, I added. No more games. My mother leaned forward, her eyes pleading, searching for the broken girl she thought she knew. Cora, please. You don't understand what it was like. You were always so much. So emotional, so full of questions. We were just trying to protect you. To protect us. A small, genuine smile touched my lips. It felt like the first real one in a decade. Funny, I said, standing up from the table. I think that just makes me human. They left in a flurry of whispers and panicked glances, the expensive wine forgotten on the table. I didn't watch them go. I stood by my window, looking out at the lights twinkling across the water, and breathed. It wasn't a breath of triumph, but of release. The heavy, damp air of the fog was finally clearing from my lungs. The phone rang at exactly 7:15 the next morning. It was my father. It's done, he said, his voice flat, stripped of all its former authority. The loans are paid off from our personal accounts. The LLC has been dissolved. We've contacted the lawyers. Your name is clear. There was a pause. Cora, please. Don't send that email. I let the silence hang between us, a space that held 11 years of lies. I've already taken care of it, I said finally. The scheduler has been deleted. A long, ragged sigh of relief came through the phone. He thought he'd won. He thought he'd contained the damage. But I had chosen my words carefully. I had deleted the scheduler for the email I'd described to them. In its place, I had spent the night composing a different set of letters. I sent them myself that very morning. They went to Mr. Thorne, to the Trust's Oversight Board, to the State Medical Licensing Board, and even to the head of the church charity my mother so proudly chaired. They contained everything: the audio files, the financial reports, a notarized statement from Lena Reyes detailing the years of pressure, and a quiet, factual, first-person account from me. I didn't accuse or demand retribution. I simply laid out the truth, line by line. It was never about vengeance. It was about sunlight. It was about disinfecting the rot that had festered in the dark for so long. The fallout was quiet, but absolute. The trust was immediately frozen and then fully restored to my sole, unrestricted control. The board issued a formal, written apology and launched an internal audit into their own oversight failures. My parents became ghosts in their own town. My father resigned from his firm, citing personal family matters. My mother's name vanished from the rosters of her beloved committees. They never faced a courtroom, but they faced a silent, complete unraveling of the pristine world they had built on my back. They never apologized. I never expected them to. Some wounds don't need an apology to heal, they just need air. In the months that followed, I found my footing on solid ground for the first time. I used a portion of my grandfather's legacy to establish a small foundation, which I named the Davies Project. It provides grants for independent psychological and financial assessments for young people who feel trapped in familial systems of control. Lena Reyes, having resigned from her practice, became its first director. Our relationship was reborn, built on a foundation of mutual respect and a shared mission. The most profound moment of my new life came on a bright autumn afternoon. I was sitting on a bench overlooking the harbor, the air crisp and clean, when a young woman, no older than 19, approached me hesitantly. She was clutching a worn notebook to her chest. "Are you Cora Hayes?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I nodded, a gentle curiosity stirring in me. I found your story. Someone shared it in an online support group, she stammered, her eyes wide and fearful. I think the same thing is happening to me. My parents keep telling me I'm too unstable to handle the inheritance my grandmother left me. They say it's for my own good, but I don't know what to believe anymore. I looked at her fear, her confusion, her flicker of desperate hope, and I saw myself. I saw the girl in the fog. I stood up and smiled, a real, warm smile that reached my eyes. "Why don't you sit with me for a while?" I said, patting the space on the bench beside me. "Tell me everything. I'm listening." In that moment, I understood. The final act of justice wasn't about exposing my parents or reclaiming the money. It was about becoming the person I had so desperately needed all those years ago. A witness. A believer. A safe harbor in the storm. Today, when I look in the mirror, I no longer see a fractured reflection, a girl defined by a fog she didn't create. I see a woman who learned to navigate by her own stars. And in the clear, steady eyes that look back at me, I finally recognize the curious, creative, and wildly intelligent child Mrs. Davies wrote about all those years ago. She was never lost. She was just waiting for the mist to clear.